The electricity sector in Argentina constitutes the third largest power market in Latin America. It relies mostly on thermal generation and hydropower generation. The country still has a large untapped hydroelectric potential. The prevailing natural gas-fired thermal generation is at risk due to the uncertainty about future gas supply. Faced with rising electricity demand and declining reserve margins, the government of Argentina is in the process of commissioning large projects, both in the generation and transmission sectors. To keep up with rising demand, it is estimated that about 1,000 megawatts of new generation capacity are needed each year. An important number of these projects are being financed by the government through trust funds, while independent private initiative is still limited as it has not fully recovered yet from the effects of the Argentine economic crisis. The electricity sector was unbundled in generation, transmission and distribution by the reforms carried out in the early 1990s. Generation occurs in a competitive and mostly liberalized market in which 75% of the generation capacity is owned by private utilities. In contrast, the transmission and distribution sectors are highly regulated and much less competitive than generation. Electricity supply and demand. Generation thermal plants fueled by natural gas are the leading source of electricity generation in Argentina. Argentina generates electricity using thermal power plants based on fossil fuels, hydroelectric plants, and nuclear plants, while wind and solar power accounted for less than 1%. Installed nominal capacity in 2014 was 31,047 megawatts. However, this scenario of gas dominance is likely to undergo changes due to gas exhaustion derived from the existing bottlenecks in exploration and production and pipeline capacity. Gas output dropped for the first time in 2005, and gas reserves dropped to 10 years of consumption by the end of 2004. Today, gas reserves are 43% lower than in 2000. This situation is further aggravated by the uncertainty surrounding the gas deals with Bolivia and the plans to build new regional pipeline connections. Total generation in 2005 was 96.65 terawatt-hours. In 2015, the Atacha-2 nuclear power plant reached 100% power, increasing the percentage of nuclear power in Argentina from 7% to 10%. The generators are divided into 8 regions: Cuyo, Comahue, Northwest, Center, Buenos Aires, Gran Buenos Aires, Littoral, Northeast and Patagonia. Installed capacity at December 31, 2015. Imports and exports in 2005. Argentina imported 6.38 terawatt-hours of electricity while it exported 3.49 terawatt-hours. Net energy imports thus were about 3% of consumption. Argentina also imports electricity from Paraguay, produced by the jointly built Yacyretá Dam. On the 18th of September 2006, Paraguay agreed to settling its debt of $11 billion owed to Argentina for the construction of Yacyretá by paying in electricity at the rate of 8,000 gigawatt-hours per year for 40 years. Demand. Electricity demand in Argentina has steadily grown since 1991, with just a temporary decline caused by the economic crisis of 2001-2002 that has been followed by a quick recovery in the last 5 years, partially due to economic recovery. In 2005, the country consumed 94.3 terawatt-hours of electricity, which corresponds to 2,368 kilowatt-hours per capita. Residential consumption accounted for 29% of the total, while industrial and commercial and public represented 43% and 26% respectively. Demand and supply projections. Argentina currently faces a tight supply-demand scenario as reserve margins have declined from above 30% in 2001 to less than 10%. This fact, together with the deterioration in distribution companies' services, has the potential to endanger supply. To sustain a 6 to 8% annual increase in demand, it is estimated that the system should incorporate about 1,000 megawatts of generation capacity each year. Transmission and distribution. In Argentina, there are two main interconnected systems, SADI in the north and center-south of the country, and SIP in the south. Both systems are integrated since March 2006. The electricity market in the SADI area is managed by the MEM. Access to electricity. Total electricity coverage in Argentina was as high as 95% in 2003. However, about 30% of the rural population lacks access to electricity. The Renewable Energy in the Rural Market project is one of several programs being implemented to enlarge electricity coverage in rural areas. Service quality. Interruption frequency and duration. Interruption frequency and duration are considerably below the averages for the LAC region. In 2002, the average number of interruptions per subscriber was 5.15, while duration of interruptions per subscriber was 5.25 hours. The weighted averages for LAC were 13 interruptions and 14 hours respectively. Distribution and transmission losses. Distribution losses in 2005 were 13.6%, down from 17% a decade before. In 2014, losses were about 3.3%. Responsibilities in the electricity sector. Policy and regulation. The Energy Secretariat is responsible for policy setting, while the National Electricity Regulator is the independent entity within the Energy Secretariat responsible for applying the regulatory framework established by Law 26,046 of 1991. ENRE is in charge of regulation and overall supervision of the sector under federal control. Provincial regulators regulate the rest of the utilities. ENRE and the provincial regulators set tariffs and supervise compliance of regulated transmission and distribution entities with safety, quality, technical and environmental standards. CAMMESA is the administrator of the wholesale electricity market. Its main functions include the operation and dispatch of generation and price calculation in the spot market, the real-time operation of the electricity system and the administration of the commercial transactions in the electricity market. The Electric Power Federal Council, created in 1960, plays a very important role in the sector as well. It is the administrator of funds that specifically target electricity operations and is also an advisor to the national and the provincial governments in issues relating to the power industry, public and private energy services, priorities in the execution of new projects and studies, concessions and authorizations, and electricity tariffs and prices. It is also an advisor for legislative modifications in the power industry. The Argentine power sector is one of the most competitive and deregulated in South America. However, the fact that the Energy Secretariat has veto power over CAMMESA has the potential to alter the functioning of the competitive market. The functions of generation, transmission, and distribution are open to the private sector. but there are restrictions on cross-ownership between these three functions. Argentine law guarantees access to the grid in order to create a competitive environment and to allow generators to serve customers anywhere in the country. Generation. Private and state-owned companies carry out generation in a competitive, mostly liberalized electricity market, with 75% of total installed capacity in private hands. The share in public hands corresponds to nuclear generation and to the two binational hydropower plants, Jairita and Salto Grande. The generation sector is highly fragmented with more than 10 large companies, all of them providing less than 15% of the system's total capacity. Power generators sell their electricity in the wholesale market operated by the CAMMESA. Transmission and distribution. The transmission and distribution sectors are highly regulated and less competitive than generation. In transmission, the Compañía Nacional de Transporte Energético en Alta Tensión operates the national electricity transmission grid under a long-term agreement with the Argentine government. In the distribution sector, three private companies, EDNA, Edesur and Edilap, dominate a market with 75% controlled by private firms. Other important distribution companies at the provincial level are Public Provincial EPEC, EPESFI, Private Provincial ESJ, EDIT, Eden, EDEA, EADS. History of the electricity sector. Prior to 1991, the electricity sector in Argentina was vertically integrated. The sector experienced a serious crisis in the summers of 1988–1989, primarily due to the lack of maintenance of the country's thermal power plants. Shortly after the crisis, the government of Carlos Menem introduced a new legal framework for the electricity sector through Law 24,065, which included the following elements: vertical and horizontal unbundling of generation, transmission and distribution, opening up of all segments to the private sector, and separation of the regulatory function from policy setting. As a result of the new law, there was substantial private investment which, together with the public power plants that started production in the 1990s, transformed a situation of power shortage and low quality into one of abundance and reliability at lower prices. ENRE was created in 1992. The wholesale electricity market, which covers up to 93% of total demand corresponding to the Argentine interconnected system, was also created in 1992. The remaining 7% share of the demand corresponds to Patagonia, which had its own interconnected market. The Patagonian wholesale electricity market MEMSP, now interconnected with the CAMMESA, was also created that year and assigned the responsibilities of coordinating dispatch operations, setting wholesale prices and administrating economic transactions performed through the Argentine interconnected system. The reforms implemented in the 1990s led to higher investment, which allowed for a 75% increase in generation capacity, resulting in the decrease of prices in the wholesale market from $40 per MWh in 1992 to $23 per MWh in 2001. However, the reforms failed to deliver the necessary increase in transmission capacity. Only one relevant project, the addition of the 1,300 km high-voltage line between Comahue and Buenos Aires, was built in the 1990s. Distribution networks were also renovated and expanded, which resulted in efficiency and quality improvements. tariff freeze. As a response to the 2001 economic crisis, electricity tariffs were converted to the Argentine peso and frozen in January 2002 through the Public Emergency and Exchange Regime Law. Together with high inflation and the devaluation of the peso, many companies in the sector had to deal with high levels of debt in foreign currency under a scenario in which the revenues remained stable, while their costs increased. This situation has led to severe underinvestment and unavailability to keep up with an increasing demand, factors that contributed to the 2003-2004 energy crisis. Since 2003, the government has been in the process of introducing modifications that allow for tariff increases. Industrial and commercial consumers' tariffs have already been raised, but residential tariffs still remain the same. Creation of ENARSO. In 2004, President Néstor Kirchner created Energía Argentina Sociedad Anónima, a company managed by the national state of Argentina for the exploitation and commercialization of petroleum and natural gas, but also the generation, transmission, and trade of electricity. Through the creation of ENARSO, the state will regain a relevant place in the energy market that was largely privatized during the 1990s. Energy Plus and Gas Plus programs. In September 2006, SENER launched the Energy Plus program with the objective of increasing generation capacity and meeting the rising demand for electricity. The program applies for consumption levels above those for 2005. CAMMESA requires all large users to contract the difference between their current demand and the demand in the year 2005 in the Energy Plus market. In this new deregulated market, only energy produced from new generation plants will be traded. The aim of the program is twofold. In one hand, it seeks to guarantee supply to residential consumers, public entities, and small and medium enterprises. On the other hand, it aims at encouraging self-generation by the industrial sector and electricity cogeneration. In March 2008, the government approved Resolution 24/2008, which created a new natural gas market called Gas Plus to encourage private investment in natural gas exploration and production. The Gas Plus regime applies to new discoveries and to tight gas fields. The price of the new gas, whose commercialization will be restricted to the domestic market, will not be subject to the conditions established in the Agreement with Natural Gas Producers 2007 to 2011, but will be based on costs and a reasonable profit. Experts believe that, if the Gas Plus regime is successful, it could stimulate new investments in electricity generation plants under the Energy Plus regime, as it could ensure fuel supply to the new plants. The National Program for the Rational and Efficient Use of Energy. In December 2007, the government launched the National Program for the Rational and Efficient Use of Energy. This decree declared the rational and efficient use of energy to be in the national interest and is also part of the energy sector strategy to counter supply-demand imbalance. The PRONUIEE, under the responsibility of the Secretariat of Energy, aims to be a vehicle for improving energy efficiency in the energy-consuming sectors and acknowledges that energy efficiency needs to be promoted with a long-term commitment and vision. It also acknowledges the connection between energy efficiency and sustainable development, including the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. The program also recognizes the need for individual behavioral changes to be promoted with an educational strategy, with the public sector setting the example by assuming a leadership role in the implementation of energy conservation measures in its facilities. The PRONUIEE includes short and long-term measures aimed at improving the energy efficiency efficiency in the industrial, commercial, transport, residential and service sectors and public buildings. It also supports educational programs on energy efficiency, enhanced regulations to expand cogeneration activities, labeling of equipment and appliances that use energy, improvements to the energy efficiency regulations, and broader utilization of the Clean Development Mechanism to support the development of energy efficiency projects. The objective of the program is to reduce electricity consumption by 6%. One of the first activities defined under PRONUIE is the national program to phase out incandescent bulbs by 2011 in Argentina. The program, financed by the government, aims to replace incandescent bulbs with energy-efficient compact fluorescent lamps in all households connected to the electricity grid and selected public buildings. The program, which has initially undergone a pilot phase and expects to replace 5 million incandescent lamps in the next 6 months, foresees the distribution of 25 million lamps overall. Staff from the distribution companies will visit each household to replace the incandescent lamps and to inform residential users on the advantages of replacing the bulbs and of the efficient use of energy in general. In Argentina, retail tariffs for the distribution utilities in the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires and La Plata City are regulated by the National Regulatory Agency, while provincial utilities are regulated by local regulators. While the utilities under ENRE's jurisdiction had not been allowed to raise residential tariffs since they were frozen in 2002 as a result of the Emergency and Exchange Regime Law, some provincial regulators had recently approved additional charges to residential tariffs. In particular, the Public Service Regulatory Agency in the province of Córdoba agreed in February 2008 to a 17.4% additional charge to residential customers. Likewise, Santa Fe.It approved increases between 10% and 20%, Mendoza between 0 and 5% below 300 kWh and between 10% and 27% above 300 kWh, Jujuy between 22% and 29% and Tucumán between 10% and 24%. Other provinces are expected to raise tariffs in the near future. Recently, in August 2008, after a 7-year tariff freeze, residential electricity tariffs in the Buenos Aires metropolitan area have been increased by 10 to 30% for households that consume more than 650 kWh every 2 months. For consumption between 651 kWh and 800 kWh, the increase will be 10%. On the other end, for users over 1,201 kWh, the increase amounts to 30%. The increase impacts around 24% of all EDNA, Edesur and Edilap customers. For commercial and industrial users, the increase will be 10%. At the end of August 2008, ENRE also approved increases in transmission tariffs in the 17% to 47% range. The increase granted by ENRE was below the increase determined by the Energy Secretariat for some transmission companies will most likely challenge ENRE's decision. An overall tariff revision is still pending and has been put off until February 2009. Tariffs, cost recovery and subsidies. Tariffs. Electricity tariffs in Argentina are well below the LAC average. In 2004, the average residential tariff was $0.038 per kWh, very similar to the average industrial tariff, which was $0.0386 per kWh in 2003. Weighted averages for LAC were $0.115 per kWh for residential consumers and $0.107 per kWh for industrial customers. Subsidies. See Fund for the Electric Development of the Interior below. Investment and financing. In 1991, the government of Argentina created the National Fund for Electric Power, to be funded by a share of the petrol tax and a surcharge on sales from the wholesale market. This fund, which is administered by CFEE, provides funding to the following other funds at the shares indicated. 47.4% Subsidiary Fund for Regional Tariff Compensation to Final Users, for homogenization of tariffs across the country. 31.6% Fund for the Electric Development of the Interior, for generation, transmission and rural and urban distribution works. Most funds have been directed to rural electrification. 19.75% Fiduciary Fund for Federal Electricity Transmission, for co-financing of projects in electricity transmission. 1.26% Wind Energy Fund, for the development of wind energy. In addition, CAMMESA, the administrator of the wholesale electricity market, had projected that by 2007 the country's energy demand would require an additional capacity of 1,600 megawatts. Faced with the need for specific investments but also with a lack of private investment, the Energy Secretariat enacted Resolutions 712 and 826 in 2004, which created FONINVEMEM, the fund for the investment needed to increase the supply of electricity in the wholesale market. The fund, which sought to encourage participation from creditors of the wholesale market, invited those creditors, mainly generation companies, to participate with the credit in the creation of the fund itself. Ongoing projects. There are several projects that are part of the government's response to the predicted electricity shortages. If all those plans are completed as expected, the capacity requirements for the next few years will be met. Thermal power. 2 new CCGT plants, the José de San Martin Thermoelectric and Manuel Belgrano Thermoelectric, of 830 megawatts each, are under construction and expected to start full operations at the beginning of 2009. Indesa, Total S.A.A.S. Corporation, Petrobras, EDF and Duke Energy are the main shareholders in the plants. Both plants, which have been financed through the FONINVEMEM, are expected to start full operations at the beginning of 2009. In addition, the Planning Ministry announced in July 2007 the commissioning of 5 new thermal plants with a total capacity of 1.6 gigawatts and an overall investment of $3,250 million. These dual-generation turbine plants, which are expected to start operations in 2008, will be located in Ensenada, Necochea, Campana, Santa Fe and Córdoba. Finally, ENARSA has recently launched bidding for 11 small and transportable generation units and for other 3 larger generation units to be installed on barges. These new units, whose base price is still unknown, will add between 400 and 500 megawatts of new generation capacity. Nuclear power. In 2006, the Argentine government launched a plan to boost nuclear energy. The Atacha nuclear power plant, whose construction started in 1981, will be completed and will add 750 megawatts of generation capacity by 2010. In addition, the Embalse nuclear power plant, with 648 megawatts of generation capacity, will be refurbished to extend its operational life beyond 2011. Hydropower. On the hydropower side, the Yas-i-Rita Dam's reservoir was elevated by 7 meters to the height of 83 meters as contemplated in its original design, which increased its capacity from 1,700 to 3,100 megawatts. This will lead to a 60% increase in its electricity output. The reservoir rise was complete in February 2011 despite a serious controversy regarding the resettlement of people. Additionally, in 2006, bidding for the expansion of Yas-i-Rita with the construction of a new 3-turbine plant in the Anacoa arm of the Parana River was announced by the government. This expansion, to be finalized in 2010, would add 300 megawatts of new generation capacity. Transmission. In regard to transmission, the federal plan for transport of electric energy at 500 kilovolts is under implementation under the umbrella of the FFDEF. The main lines of the plan are already built or currently under construction. The lines built between 2007 and 2009 will add 4,813 new kilometers of high-voltage transmission capacity. In addition, the federal plan for transport of electric energy too, defined in 2003 and updated in 2006, has the objective of addressing the constraints faced by the regional transmission networks in the period up to 2010. This complementary plan has prioritized the necessary works according to their ability to address short-term demand issues. 109 of the 240 works identified in 2003 were considered of high priority and have already been completed or are under execution. Initially, investment for high-priority works was estimated at $376 million, while estimated investment for the rest of the works totaled $882.2 million. However, this budget is under revision due to the increasing costs of materials such as steel and aluminum and of labor. Summary of private participation in the electricity sector. Prior to 1991, the electricity sector in Argentina was vertically integrated. The new legal framework for the electricity sector included vertical and horizontal unbundling of generation, transmission and distribution, opening up of all segments to the private sector, and separation of the regulatory function from policy setting. Currently, private and state-owned companies carry out generation in a competitive, mostly liberalized electricity market, with 75% of total installed capacity in private hands. The publicly owned share corresponds to nuclear generation and to the two binational hydropower plants, Yas-i-Rita and Salto Grande. On the other hand, the transmission and distribution sectors are highly regulated and less competitive than generation. In transmission, the Compañía Nacional de Transporte Energético en Alta Tensión operates the national electricity transmission grid, while in the distribution sector, 3 private companies, EDNA, Edesur and Edilap, dominate a market with 75% controlled by private firms.